Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to, sadly, another In Memoriam video. Kind of last night we heard the news that Yaphet Kotto has died at the age of 81. Yaphet Kotto started in television, did some theatre, and then started really getting some attention in film roles in the 70s. Went on to appear in several films and one amazing TV show, which is where I really kind of fell in love with his style. The fact that he could be threatening and scary, but also lovable and funny, sometimes within 2 sentences. He was a big man, 6'4", seemed bigger than that. He had an amazing screen presence, and it's just, even at the age of 81, it is a bit of a bummer doing these videos, but it's more of a celebration of the man and his work. So I'm just going to go through a few of his films. Sometimes him being in them is the reason that I have them, because he is one of my favourite actors of all time. I feel bad now for not including him in the shortlist for the greatest actor of all time, which I chose Max von Sydow, if you want to go check out that video. So the first film I'm going to kind of talk about is Bone, which perhaps isn't a film that lots of people have seen. Directed by Larry Cohen. This is a troublesome, dark film from the early 70s about rich white suburban people in Beverly Hills, and this character played by Yaphet Kotto comes into their life and turns their life upside down. Their views on race and sex become changed. The relationship between each other becomes changed. It's kind of an outlier in Larry Cohen's career, in the sense it's not like a creature feature, or it's not a satire. Well, it's a satire, but it's not a science fiction film. It's very gritty. It's pretty disturbing. There's obviously like strong racial language in it. It's just a very abrasive film. It doesn't perhaps work completely, but it's certainly an interesting film, and Kotto's performance is very visceral. Again, he's really physical in the film, and it's, if you're a Larry Cohen completist, or a Larry Cohen fan, it's an interesting early kind of serious film. Next up, he did blaxploitation in the 70s, like most African American actors did. So he did Friday Foster with Pam Grier, where he played a private detective. This one's perhaps not as good as Coffee and Foxy Brown, but it's still an essential Pam Grier, with good support from Yaphet Kotto. He did Across 110th Street with Anthony Quinn, where he plays a kind of new police officer, and also Anthony Quinn is pretty much an old racist, so he has to put up with that, as well as the big case that they have to pull down when mafia money gets stolen, and mafia members get killed as reprisals. They have to kind of tidy up. while he's dealing with Anthony Quinn's foul mouth and foul attitudes. Again, he brings a physicality. You can't not bring a physicality because, like I said, he was 6'4" and a very big man. Next is Truck Turner with Isaac Hayes. This one's fascinating because for the first half hour, it's not really that good a film, in my opinion. Isaac Hayes is okay, but it doesn't really seem to go anywhere. And then Yaphet Kotto turns up, and the film completely changes. It becomes a lot more energised. I mean, Yaphet Kotto's electricity and just presence just completely dwarfs Isaac Hayes, who's a big man himself. And it becomes like a Yaphet Kotto film and not an Isaac Hayes star vehicle, as far as I'm concerned. Again, it's just that wonderful physical threat, but still doing it with a charm and a likability, even though he is playing pretty much a scumbag in Truck Turner, but he still pulls it off that he's a scumbag that you can't take your eyes off. Next came a quote-unquote serious film, Paul Schrader's Blue Collar. He kind of gets overlooked because of Richard Pryor's performance and Harvey Keitel, but Yaphet Kotto still gives a really good performance as one of the men who decide to take revenge on the company and take revenge on the union by robbing the union safe. If you haven't seen the film, I won't spoil it. But his fate isn't great. But again, this is more of a serious film. This isn't blaxploitation, and this probably helped him get more serious roles, including his next, one of his most famous performances the year later, because he was cast as Parker in Ridley Scott's Alien. And again, he brings a humour to it as well as an authenticity. Obviously the whole film is kind of authentic, as in truckers in space, basically. This idea that space isn't all shiny and wonderful and everybody's happy. Everybody still has to work for a living. Everybody still has to do jobs that they hate. His relationship with Harry Dean Stanton, as they're the two kind of grunts, no offence, none taken, on the ship, as they kind of are only concerned about their money and whether they're getting their bonuses, which again is really real. Now obviously as an African American, we're kind of grown up seeing African American characters in horror films, especially in these kind of science fiction films, as they're the ones that usually die first. I know that might be a trope that might not necessarily be true, but most of the time it kind of was. So for spoilers, Yaphet Kotto to be the last man standing, not necessarily the last woman standing, but to be the last man standing in Alien, I mean, it sounds probably hyperbole, but it was kind of groundbreaking. But that whole film was kind of groundbreaking as far as audience expectations. Again, we had grown up with the captain as the one that lasts longest. You know, the captain goes down with the ship. The captain is usually the hero. In this case, Dallas, played by Tom Skerritt. So again, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Alien, but Tom Skerritt doesn't make it to the end, which at the time I think was pretty surprising. Obviously Sigourney Weaver as Ripley, she is the last woman standing, which again at the time would have been a surprise, and obviously Parker surviving as long as he does. He comes to Ripley's aid when Ash goes ballistic and is trying to rape her. So it was unusual, quite frankly, to see an African American guy survive that long, to be honest. I mean, sadly, when you think about it, the crew of the Nostromo is getting smaller and smaller, because Kane, John Hurt's gone, Ash, Ian Holmes gone, Harry Dean Stanton's Brett, he's gone, and now, sadly, Yaphet Kotto's Parker's gone. So the crew of the Nostromo is getting smaller. So obviously that kind of opened his career up. Still, he never became like a superstar. He was always like a character actor. But that's probably one of his most successful films and kind of garnered him a lot of attention. So the next one I have is Live and Let Die. Now, I'm not a James Bond fan. I only have 2 James Bond films, and it's because of the villains. One is Live and Let Die because of Yaphet Kotto. That's the only reason I have Live and Let Die. And View to a Kill, and the only reason I have that is for Christopher Walken. So I'm not a Bond fan, but he's wonderful in Live and Let Die. He's having an absolute blast. Again, he can be really threatening, but he can also be really fun. He has a great smile when he unveils his disguise in front of Bond. He just has that kind of knowing smile that was just so wonderful to see when he did it. It's just a fun, daft Bond film, but Kotto gives a really good turn as the villain. Next is one of my favourite films of all time. It made my top 150 list, and that's Midnight Run. Such a great film from 1988, and again, Yaphet Kotto gets overlooked in this because it's all about De Niro and Grodin and the kind of chemistry between them, which is brilliant. But you have to have a straight man, and Yaphet Kotto plays the FBI agent Alonzo Mosley, whose identity Robert De Niro pinches. He has 2 kind of flunkies that are always putting their foot in their mouths, and his reactions to their stupidity is just wonderful. Again, that mix of he can put on the charm, but he can also give them stares that make them very small. Again, for such a quote unquote straight role, he really puts a lot of humour into it. You know, at the end when he thinks it's going all wrong, he gets quite upset. There's a beautiful moment on the plane where he's agreed to let De Niro have Charles Grodin to take him back to get his reward on the bounty, and De Niro was getting wired up to trap Dennis Farina's gangster, and De Niro's like giving a little smile, and Yaphet Kotto asks him, "What are you smiling about?" And De Niro says it's because it makes him feel like a cop again. And Yaphet Kotto just gives this little subtle kind of, okay, you know, it's not a big movement he gives, but you know that his character has some respect for De Niro's character. It's just a beautiful little moment which never really gets talked about, and it's kind of passed over. Again, De Niro's doing a bit of mugging during the film. Charles Grodin is like, Dennis Farina and John Ashton are doing all the loud stuff, and Kotto just like gives a really classy, funny, wonderful performance as FBI agent Alonzo Mosley. But it's kind of the performance that nobody talks about in Midnight Run, but it's absolutely wonderful. And now I'm going to talk about really the real reason that I loved Yaphet Kotto and his work is as my camera goes off to the side. It's his work as Al Giordano, as Giardello even, in Homicide-Life in the Street. Arguably the greatest TV show of all time. He did make a brief appearance in one episode of The Wire, also written by David Simon. So 7 series of Homicide, including Camera Just Wants to Fall Over. It's going out in tribute to Yaphet Kotto. So 7 seasons, including it was finished off by the TV movie in the year 2000. But I really don't want to talk about that because I might actually get a bit emotional about it. Yeah, Homicide-Life in the Street. He plays the shift commander, Giardello, of Italian descent. There's lots of jokes about that. But again, he knows when to be heavy-handed with the detectives. He knows when to be light. You know, the whole narrative around the big board. You know, when cases are in red, it means they're still alive and unsolved. And they go to the black, it means they've been shut. Sometimes he just needs to come out and have a look at the board and look confused, and that's enough to kind of get the detectives to pay attention and put extra effort in. Other times he'll go ballistic at people. You know, his relationship with his daughter, because his wife died previously. It's such a beautifully well-rounded character. The fact that the bosses are always trying to screw him over. He has kind of ideas of getting promotions, but because of the choices he makes, the fact that he'll defend his guys, sometimes he'll fall on the sword for his guys. It's such a great role, great performance. I mean, Homicide-Life in the Street is probably the most neglected great TV show of all time. It used to be on Channel 4 in the UK in the 90s. It ran from 93 to 99, and then the TV movie was 2000. But Channel 4, it would always be like on at 11 o'clock at night or midnight or 2 in the morning. They would change the day it was on. It was almost as if they didn't want people to actually watch it. At the time, NYPD Blue was the hit, and that always went out at a certain time and a certain night. And because, you know, Homicide, like The Wire, set in Baltimore, which is a mainly African American town. You know, there's African American actors in Homicide. The majority are probably African American. So it was just like the underdog, but it's way better than NYPD Blue. It focuses on the grey areas. You know, there's no black and white in the cases. It's always like the grey areas. The detectives have these existential conversations about the moral dilemmas. There's a wonderful episode, for example, about this doctor who pretty much doesn't treat a gangbanger with the treatment he deserves after a gunshot, and he dies. And then the investigation, they end up having to charge the doctor, who's a successful doctor, who's cured all these people or saved all these lives, but because she didn't give this guy the right care and attention, it counts as pretty much manslaughter or homicide. And 2 detectives have this like almost like 10-minute existential conversation in their car about, do we really have to arrest her? You know, it's like, look all the good work she's done compared with this one incident. And it's like, that's what Homicide was about. Sometimes the cases never get solved. Sometimes they know who did it, but because of procedural stuff and circumstantial stuff, they have to let them go and they have to live with that. There's cases that haunt them like forever, that they just can never close. and that was kind of, it's the antithesis of the usual detective shows where everything's wrapped up neatly at the end of the hour or the end of the 50-minute episode. Homicide was never like that. So if you've never seen Homicide, track it down. Unfortunately, it is just available in these DVD sets. It hasn't got a Blu-ray upgrade. It was shot in HBO at the time where you couldn't have swearing in HBO. There's not a lot of violence, it's mostly all talk, but it's just wonderful. There's not a lot of car chases and shootouts, there's a few, but that wasn't really what Homicide-life in the Street was about. And Yaphet Kotto held all of that together, because he was like the through line. You know, actors came and went. You know, when actors left the show, they were on suspension, you know, or other things happened to them. But Yaphet Kotto was always the through line, as he tried to have the balance between the detectives on the ground and the higher ups, you know, which he usually clashed with. It's just a wonderful character for Yaphet Kotto. And yes, he was famous for Alien and Live and Let Die, but for me, Al Giardello, can't even say his name, was his best character, his defining character of his career. Might not be the most prolific career in the world, but just one of the great character actors. And you know, we should all tip our hat and thank him for what he did, how he enriched our lives, and he certainly won't be forgotten. So thanks so much for watching this. Unfortunately, there's some actors that die that I just feel I have to do this for, unfortunately, but he certainly won't be forgotten. I mean, Parker will live on, and so will Yaphet Kotto in our minds. So thanks so much for watching. This is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films, saying farewell.